Well, welcome to Chapter 11. We're going to talk about making decisions with some of the information that we've been learning from previous chapters and how we apply that to special considerations that businesses might face and make a decision about should we do something or should we not do something. And part of what we're going to talk about then begins on page 409 at the very bottom and also on 410. And you'll see this graph on the top of page 410. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the decision-making process and basically the 5 steps. And that's what this graph shows us, is first determine what is our company's business environment, the strategy that they're using. Are they a cost leader? Are they a differentiator? Are they something else? That will come into play in making the right decision. Next is to specify the criteria needed to make a decision, and then identify all the potential actions that can be taken based on the criteria that have been identified. And so that leads us to 3, and there's 3 parts to 3, and that is to identify and collect the relevant information. And we've talked about what relevant is, and we'll talk about that some more yet. Predict future values of relevant costs and revenues. So we're trying to predict the future based on the choices that we make. Those are both short term. Then long term we'll apply some kind of a strategic analysis to it, and then select and implement the best course of action, and then finally evaluate their performance after that course of action has been adopted. Okay, so obviously it kind of logical, makes sense, but lots of things to consider and think about there. We have talked about what a relevant cost is in the past, but I want you to be aware of what it is for this chapter also. We're talking about a future cost that will differ based on different decisions that are taken. So any cost that is the same no matter what choice is made is not relevant. It only happens to costs that will be different based on the different choices that we can make. Okay, so the future cost must differ between different decisions. And they use some examples in the book, of course, and they'll walk us through a few things that will make you think about it. And they talk about a car dealer buying a new automobile. On page 411, you'll see some information there. And be sure to read through that. And an example that I've used before in class is if you're shopping for a new car and you've identified 2 alternatives. What is relevant is the potential cost of insurance could be different for each of the cars. If the sales price is a little bit different based on the price, the model, the make, all those things might have an influence on what the cost of insurance is. Gas mileage or maintenance costs could be also a difference between the two. But one thing that would not be different is if you pay for parking, it doesn't matter what vehicle you park there, you're still going to pay for parking no matter what. So that would not be relevant because that's a sunk cost or something that just doesn't change. So we would not take that into consideration. So we only take into consideration costs that change based on what choice or what decisions that we make. And so about the top half of page 411 is an automobile example. And then the bottom half of 411 is the example you see on your screen here, which is to do we replace or fix an old machine? Which choice should we make? And before we kind of walk through that, I want you to be aware of Exhibit 11.2 on the top of page 411, which is a good picture of explaining costs that are not relevant versus costs that are relevant, and they walk you through that with the new car example. Basically, costs that differ versus costs that are the same, and which are relevant and which are not relevant. So make sure you read through that to go along with the car example on 411. So going back to the example here of this equipment, they're going to give us a lot of information in the chapter, especially in the bottom of 411. And the setup is just like you see here. We bought a machine. The cost was $4,200. It has a 2-year life. We've depreciated it over the 2 years. So after 1 year, the book value is 2,100. Basically, half of its useful life has been depreciated away. And now we're faced with a choice because the machine is not working properly anymore. Do we go out and buy a new machine, or do we fix the old machine, the one that we have now? So we can go out and buy a new one for $7,000. The new machine, if we buy it, will have no salvage value. So once we're done using it, it's not worth anything. Repairs to the old machine would be $3,500 and would give us 1 more year of productivity. Okay. Power for either machine is $250 an hour. It's not different between the two. The new machine will reduce labor costs by 50 cents. That's a very important thing to know. And expected level of output for the next year is 2,000 units. So based on information, the next step is to identify what is relevant and what's not relevant. And you can kind of just think about some of these things right here. There's a couple of obvious ones. Okay, what's happened in the past is typically not relevant. So the original cost, probably not relevant. The current book value, probably not relevant. The fact that the power used for each machine is the same per hour, probably not relevant. Okay, so let's look at the next screen, and you can see what the relevant costs are versus the irrelevant costs. And what they've lined out is anything that's not relevant. Okay, so the original cost, the book value of the old, the fact that the new machine has 0 salvage value, because the old machine also has a 0 salvage value, and the power being the same. So what's left is anything that's different between the two. So the purchase price of the new machine of $7,000, that's different between the two. The repairs to the old machine, $3,500, and giving us an extra year of productivity, that's different. That's basically boiled down to our two choices right there, to buy the new one or fix the old one. But one more relevant thing to think about is the fact that the new machine will reduce labor costs by 50 cents per hour. So even though that machine will cost more to purchase than to fix the old one, the fact that the machine will allow us to cut down on labor may be a saving grace for buying the new machine potentially. Along with relevant costs and things to think about is kind of looking at things on an ABC level, kind of like we've been doing throughout the class ever since we've covered the ABC chapter. Is they mention on page 413, on the top of that page, information about batch level cost drivers. And you know what, before I get to that, I should tell you that with coming back to this information right here, they show us the conclusion to this on the bottom of page 412. I didn't mean to skip over that. On the bottom of 412 then, they show us the relevant costs and how those would be turn out based on the buy or I should say repair versus replace decision that we need to make with our machines. And they show us the variable cost is one key difference between the two, and that's your labor cost, because if we repair, labor cost is $20,000, but if we do replace, it goes down 50 cents an hour, which saves us $1,000. So now it's $19,000. We know that fixed cost then is basically the $3,500 to repair the old machine versus $7,000 to buy the new machine, and we add up the cost, the relevant cost, and repair comes out to be $23,500, and replace comes out to be $26,000. So because repair is lower than replace, we would probably go with the repair choice. And just because that new machine is so much more expensive than the old machine, and even though the new machine allows us to be more efficient with labor, it's not enough savings to offset the additional purchase price. So that's just one thing to think about. They show us how those numbers proved out on the bottom of 412. I did not mean to skip over that. So now the next step is just to think about, when it comes to relevant costs, just some additional considerations to think about is the fact that if you look at things on an ABC level, that batch level cost drivers should be considered to be in relevant cost analysis. Okay, and they say it right here. For example, if a setup of one machine takes longer and requires more skilled labor than the other machine, that's obviously very relevant, right? So if one machine allows us to be more efficient, setups don't take as long, or we don't need the same level of skilled labor so we can hire cheaper labor, obviously a very relevant thing. So just additional food for thought as we think about relevant costs. We can't just look at total labor, but possibly the fact that we can break down to cheaper labor, less labor, depending on the batches, the skill it takes to set them up, and so on. Then of course we've talked about opportunity costs, but it's good to remember what that means. It's basically a benefit lost when we choose one option over another. Okay. For example, addition of a new product could cause reduction, delay, or lost sales in other product areas. So sometimes it's the opportunity given up because we've chosen one alternative versus another. So if we decide to focus some resources and attention on launching a new product line, it's possible we're going to rob sales from existing product lines, or because we're paying attention to this new product line, we're losing focus on our existing product lines, losing sales, losing quality, or some things like that. Some other things to think about with relevant costs. These are mostly listed on the top of page 414, is the fact that depreciation is typically not included, except when there's some tax implications, because depreciation reduces taxable income. So it can be a factor when we talk, if we bring in the tax component. Otherwise, it typically is not. We also need to think about the time value of money when we're talking about cash flows over 2 or more years. We typically ignore time value of money if we're just thinking within the next year, the short term. But as soon as we move into more of a long-term analysis, then we have to be thinking about the time value of money. And then also we have the qualitative factors, and we have to keep those in mind throughout the chapter. We're going to focus a lot on quantitative factors, basically crunching the numbers, quantifying decisions. Should we do it or should we not do it based on what the numbers say? But that's not always the answer. We still have to think about the qualitative factors. Okay, so if we outsource, are we going to lose quality or control over our quality? Functionality, timeliness of delivery. If we decide to outsource or give up control and get cheaper cost, are we losing quality? Are we losing timeliness of delivery? Are we losing the reliability of shipping? Service levels, things like that. So if we're going to outsource something and it's cheaper, that might be a good reason to do it, but are we potentially losing out on some other things that could affect the quality of our products, the quality of service, and ultimately the reputation of the company? And if that's negatively impacted, then we made a bad decision. So the qualitative factors will always come into play also. So just keep that in mind. Strategic analysis, so really, that's kind of the underlying strategy that we need to be thinking about in this class, and how we use all this cost information that we've been looking at throughout the class. How do we use this when it comes to strategy for a firm, and making sure that a firm is still focused on achieving all of its long-term strategic goals? Okay, and so it says here, by identifying only one relevant cost, it's possible we might make the wrong decision. We might fail to link a decision to strategy. Okay, if we only focus on relevant costs, and we kind of lose sight of the forest for the trees kind of an analysis there. And so you can't just look at relevant cost. You still have to think big picture. Okay, and that's what they mean by that. So they're saying here, and that's the example I've kind of been saying, the second bullet point here, it might be good to outsource production of certain parts based on somebody else can do it cheaper than us. Okay, that's possible. However, if those products, those parts that we're outsourcing, if we don't receive them on time, If they're not up to our quality standards and they cause our products to be delayed shipping, we lose sales, or our products are not of the highest quality anymore and customers buy our product, it breaks down, they stop doing business with us. We've made some very bad decisions. So we have to keep in mind big picture overall strategy. If part of our reputation is high quality and we decide to outsource something, are we giving up some quality? Okay, so we have to know what is our firm's strategy. Definitely comes into the decisions that we're going to make. Okay, Exhibit 11.6 is towards the very bottom of page 414, and I want to make sure that you understand some of these things here. And we talk about a relevant cost analysis and how do we link some of these relevant costs to some types of strategies that companies undertake. So relevant cost, we tend to think of those as being short term. When strategy means we need to be thinking long term. Relevant costs are not necessarily linked to strategy, okay? And obviously we need to be thinking strategy, big picture, long term. Product cost focus means we're giving up potentially what the customer really wants from us, which is maybe high quality delivered on time. We focus on individual product or decision situations, whereas strategy needs to be thinking about integrating all considerations that the business has to think about when it comes to meeting customer needs. Okay, so those are key things to be thinking about. Some other things to be thinking about are page 415, which is relevant cost analysis and strategic analysis in decision making, and what does that mean? And look at the bullet points here, and those are really the decisions that we're going to make. We're going to talk about, should we do a special order? Should we make something or lease it or buy it instead? Should we sell a product before or after additional processing is needed to take it to market? What should our service or product mix be? And profitability analysis. Should we keep or drop a product line or a service line because it's not profitable? So those are all the kind of decisions we can make using relevant cost analysis, just looking at what costs are relevant and linking that to some kind of a strategy.